I'm live.
How are you? I'm one second, one second. One second, one second. I'll just call you back. दीदी हमने पूछा कि आपको कितनी बार बोला
Will you send it to my nudge ID or okay? Okay. Sure. Sushant, then should I just what do you want me to introduce myself and okay, all right. Thanks. Bye. Hello and good morning, everyone. Uh, my name is Sriram. Thanks to Venkat, thanks to Sushant, and thanks to Living My Promise for inviting me this morning and sort of giving me an opportunity to talk to all of you. We have an hour to go, and sorry about that technical glitch. We had a slight delayed start. Uh, so, so I think a very, very quick introduction about myself. So my name is Sriram. I work with an organization called the Nudge Foundation. It's a non-profit sort of organization in India. A very quick background, like many of us in India, I am one of those million engineers who never did anything about engineering. Uh, spent the first sort of 8 9 years of my life in the consulting world. Uh, worked with a lot of sort of Fortune 500 companies, GE, Philips, Pfizer, and Baxi, etc. Then after about 9 years, I was sort of bitten by the entrepreneurial bug, very cliched, uh, but took down that path. Started an enterprise of my own, ran it for a couple of years, bootstrapped. When that sort of didn't go anywhere, we wound that up, and that was my first foray into the development sector. Uh, I first started with an organization called Amnesty International, which is a global human rights organization. Um so there I spent time in campaigning, mobilization, and retail fundraising for Amnesty in India. Had a fantastic sort of 4.5 years there with the organization, which was in Bangalore. And I've been with the Nudge Foundation after that for the last close to 5 years right now. Uh, so at the Nudge Foundation, we work on poverty alleviation, and I specifically work on sort of building partnerships within the ecosystem to do work. So that's a very quick introduction about myself. My partner today was unfortunately not, she's not able to join, but her name is Mashkura Faridi. She works with for the Azim Premji's philanthropic initiatives, and so both of us are from the development sector, if I may use that word. Uh, we will sort of quickly. So my journey into living my promise, I was introduced to it by Venkat. I'm assuming like most other people. This was sometime around last year, and it was actually a very simple, straightforward, no brainer decision. Actually, we didn't have to think too much. So both of us are motivated, fundamentally by the desire to do something good within our capacities. And therefore, it was a very simple decision for us to say that, look, after we are no more, uh, in fact, why only 50%? But we are willing to sort of donate 100% of our net wealth towards charitable causes. And in that sense, it was a simple decision. So we have taken a pledge last year, along with many of the other people, about 45 signatories so far, I guess, at Living My Promise, to donate a minimum of 50% of our wealth towards charitable causes once we are no more. So that is the pledge that we have taken. I think it's very very inspiring to be part of so many other people who have come forward to take a similar pledge. And the idea is to sort of grow this community and share our knowledge with you as we move forward. Uh, Quick introduction to everybody about who may be unfamiliar with Living My Promise. It basically is an invitation to India's well-to-do sort of community uh, to giving more than half of their wealth to philanthropy, either during their lifetime or in their will, uh, to the cause of their own choice. Living My Promise is a very self-driven initiative started by one of the promisers, Mr. Girish Batra, and now is championed by 44 other people as well. At LMP, we are inspired by the example of millions of people of all income levels who give generously to the cause of their choice, and often at a great personal sacrifice, just with a desire to make the world, a better place for everyone. Uh, Living My Promise basically aims over time to help shift the social norms of philanthropy towards giving more sooner and giving more effectively and smartly. So anyone essentially with a net worth of above 1 crore rupees can actually make the promise. The initiative is essentially a community of promisers or signatories and is not necessarily a non-profit organization. The promise is also sort of a moral commitment that one makes to oneself and the public, and you basically get to decide when to give it, who to give it, and what to give it for. Right. So we hope that through Living My Promise, we can actually create a community of like-minded individuals who would like to do more, who would like to give more, and also inspire millions of other people to rethink and re-benchmark about their own levels of giving. So that's essentially the gist and summary of what we are as a community. And once again, thanks for giving me this opportunity to share our own thoughts on how we sort of think about it. Uh, the first question that we've had, so we've been inviting questions from the community and would love to sort of share my own thoughts on it. I think the first question that we have is how has the funding landscape changed in recent times? And recent times being, in the aftermath of COVID. Uh, I think funding landscape definitely. I think all of us have been parts of, part to millions of Zoom webinars that we've been attending. I think fundamentally, specifically in the context of India, the funding landscape has and will change pretty significantly. I think if I have to sort of capture it in certain bullet points as a summary, uh, I think this is basically a wake up call to many of the civil society organizations that work in India uh, to see that we are not institutionally ready, or many of them, with a few exceptions maybe, institutionally ready to absorb such risks, right, whenever they hit us. So, our own preparedness towards such uncertainties like COVID, or for that matter, even an earthquake or a tsunami, as the case might have been in the past, is something that we really need to sort of rethink about. And what I mean by that specifically is organizational, capacity to absorb such risks, the financial, resources that are at our disposal to sort of weather over this storm, whether it is temporary or a bit medium term as well. I think our own preparedness and evaluation of our own risks and putting in place some contingency plans is something that it's a good wake up call. The community has as a whole has been sort of struggling with it, but one hopes that we will all come out of it. So given this, I think one of the important things is the organization sustainability and the reliance on external sources of funding, especially for the non-profit community. Uh, so I think one thing that has happened is definitely a signal to not be too reliant on one particular source of funding. So typically, non-profits in India have raised money from foundations, both foundations in India and foundations outside of India. The second source of funding has been the corporates through their CSR mandate. Uh, the other big source of funding has been contributions from individuals, both sort of middle class, urban salaried Indians, and also certain high net worth individuals from within and outside India. So organizations who may have been too reliant on any one of these sources of funding, I think this is a time where we have to try and diversify our sources of funding so that we are able to mitigate our risks and plan accordingly for the future. So, if an organization has been heavily dependent on, let us say, funding from corporates in India, then I think the reality is that over the next 1 to 2 years, it is going to be a challenge for the CSR market to continuously, fund non-profits. Although I must say that at least in my own personal example, in my own limited sort of example, the partners have been extremely, supportive and empathetic, and corporates have understood the need to, continuously fund the non-profits given all the limitations and challenges. But having said that, I think anybody in the non-profit community fully understands that this is something that we need to continuously keep a very, very close watch on, because as the corporates, bottom lines, they may take a hit. So the predictability and the continuity of either the funds that are already committed or the funds that we were planning for that we will absorb from corporates, there is going to be a little bit of challenge there. So there has been lots of research surveys already done on this. But what we're given to understand is that anywhere between 30 to 60% of the funding that may have been committed in the next 2 years may actually take a hit. How much is that hit going to be? It's something that we'll have to look on a case by case basis. And as leaders of independent non-profit organizations, one thing that's very important is to uh, even at the cost of over communicating to our funding and donor partners, it's imperative that we have those conversations ongoing on a very, very frequent basis to make sure that the support that is committed or going to be committed for uh, sort of sustains. So from the corporates, I think there is a little bit of challenge that we will face in the next 2 years. If you look at this particular year, because CSRs are grants that are typically granted over the last 3 years of net profits, and because COVID hit us in the early part of this year, which is the last quarter of last year, the impact on this particular year, financial year 21, may not be as bad as we may think it will be. But definitely, I think the next financial years for 22 and 23 is something that may be bad and challenging. So we'll have to prepare for that. I think the international community of funding agencies or donors, uh, there has been a sort of one hopes that it is a temporary sort of shift. In the next probably 3 to 4 months, uh, the international community has also been focused on uh, working very closely with their existing partners who they have had long-standing relationships with. So whether it is the US or the Europe or in Asia Pacific, the international funding community has been closely working with their current portfolio partners to make sure that they're able to extend all the help that they're able to do so with their current partners. So any new opportunities that may open up for organizations who are expecting to raise money from the foundations may probably have to wait for a period of 3 months. That doesn't mean that we should not have active conversations, but I think in terms of actually being able to raise money, it may be 3 months out at a bare minimum, uh, if not a bit more as well. But I think on the individual giving side, I think definitely is something that everyone needs to build a capability on, because this is a time where in the last 2 3 months as well we've seen an extremely high amount of empathy, and I don't know if I can make extend this, but it is okay to now err on the side of overtly being generous, right? I mean, that's something we have to err on the side of over generosity. So individuals around the country have come forward to donate generously to multiple causes, and there are several examples of it that we've been seeing in the last 2 3 months. So whether it is individual giving from middle class urban salaried Indians or from high net worth individuals, is something the empathy is going to continue in for the next 1 year for a variety of efforts that are being undertaken as a support, whether it is relief or in rebuilding in the context of COVID. So I think that's something that everybody should be prepared to leverage on. So that's in brief on the funding landscape, how it may change. Uh, Again, funding landscape in the context of whether it is going to be very uh, we all understand sort of direct impact or indirect impact. So organizational survival and organizational building, or the capacity of the organization to sustain this impact of COVID in the next sort of 6 months to 1 year is going to be super important. What that means is it is also very important that we are able to have contingency plans, have a very clear understanding of how cash flows look like, and then prepare our cash reserves accordingly uh, for for the next 1 year in particular. Uh, so that's sort of you know the, the broad summary of the funding landscape. We do have a few more questions. I'm just going to skim through the questions and see if we have had further questions. The other question is there have been lots, millions of people who have been pushed back into poverty. Livelihoods has taken a very, very serious hit. So has the funding, and so has the funding. What is the way out? Uh, See, I think that there has been this question of life versus livelihoods. I think, like in the case of any disaster that we have seen in the past, and if I may call COVID as a disaster, there has always been an extremely large amount of resources, effort, both in terms of human capital, financial capital, and volunteering that is channelized towards the immediate aftermath of a disaster, right? And all of us have seen examples of that happening in India and outside India as well in the past. But what tends to happen is that this energy sort of sustains itself for uh, a limited time, and beyond that, there are huge ramifications of any disaster on vulnerable communities for a very long time. So that we call as the rebuilding or the rehabilitation efforts that need to be undertaken, which is the timestamp of it is not 6 months or 8 months, but it's going to be for many years. All of you might be very too familiar with the tsunami that happened in the first half of late 2000, and there are certain communities which are still reeling under the after effects of that. So it is a very, very long term process, and it's important we pay enough attention to the livelihoods and the millions of people who have unfortunately been pushed back into extreme poverty. Uh, the way out of this in terms of accessing funds could be, I think, one of the options uh, that is possible is that uh, I think this is probably an opportune time for non-profit civil society organizations and even the funders to start working together, right? While there are a lot of non-profits that have done outstanding work in many parts of India with a particular set of target audience, but because the overall sort of funding is limited at this point of time, I think it's important to make the best use of the limited money and come together to collaborate and draw upon each other's strength. So it may not make much sense to repeat what all of us are doing, but if I have a certain strength and if somebody else has a certain strength, it's time to marry how these efforts can be, brought together, and how can we make the best use of the limited funding that may be available at this point of time. Uh, what that means in one sense is what is also the role of the civil society here? I think one way to look at it, at least, or there could be multiple options about it, but at least the way one way I think about it is that what is the role that the civil society plays here? Can the civil society organizations be those that actually do fantastic work, build a very strong case for why they are doing is actually translating into significant impact on the ground, and then developing a muscle and a capability to work closely with the government to actually take that effort forward at scale. Because all the work cannot be necessarily done by the civil society, but maybe this is a time that we have to strongly build a capability, if it has not existed in the past, to see how we can work closely with the government. So there are multiple examples of that of many organizations where there is a certain region, there is a certain target audience, whether it is education or healthcare or sanitation, problems that we all are too familiar with. If there is a particular working model that is already being demonstrated, where impact is proven, now can we take that, build a strong proof of concept, demonstrate it, take it to the government and say that, hey, here is a model that works. Now can we work together to really take it at scale? So that I think is a significant uh, sort of shift in thinking and DNA if it has already not existed within the organizational sort of capacities. Uh, so the other thing also is sort of pooled in funding. So can we look at certain structures like a fund? So here is a common fund. Uh, Whatever money is available is being channeled into this fund, and then the fund is shared by multiple organizations doing work in multiple areas. That is a different structure in which one could potentially look at raising money and making sure that the money is channeled in the right direction for the most vulnerable by credible organizations. So that's a second way of sort of looking at it. Especially those organizations who are young. So I represent a very young non-profit organization. So where we may not necessarily have the kind of footprint on the communities in a very large scale. So what is the best use of our capabilities, our strengths to sort of meaningfully contribute to change is something that we could seriously consider. So at this point of time, I think it's important to take a look at what our strengths are and how best we can contribute in that manner. Uh, we have another question that's saying, how do you see CSR funding change? I think we briefly covered this. Uh, One of the, happy to sort of quickly think, like I said, we do see an impact in the next 1 or 2 years. This year, that is leading up to March 2021, uh, I still feel the impact is not going to be that very bad, except on one thing where there have been commitments that are already made by corporates to their non-profit partners, and because of any changes in the bottom line of corporates, there may be a delay in the receivables or the collections that are expected from corporates. But I think from a commitment standpoint, I don't see a huge impact, at least in the immediate next 1 year. But in the subsequent years, because the subsequent years CSR grants are dependent on this year's profitability, uh, I I do expect, or I think we should be prepared as a community to not have high expectations from corporates on funding, which means that our models and the theories of change, not fundamentally compromising the mission, but the way we have looked at change and our models may have to go through an overhaul this year so that we are prepared for maximum impact or meaningful impact with sort of reduced funding available next year. Even within corporates, a small nuance there are certain specific industries that may likely to be hit more than the others. For example, if you look at the travel, tourism, hospitality industries, or even manufacturing, for example, they may take some time to recover, and therefore their profit lines could be hit more than certain industries, like, for example, the fast moving consumer goods industry. The FMCG industries may not or have not been hit as badly as some of the others. So even if we look at our own portfolio of who are the corporates who have funded us so far, it may make sense for us to explore other corporates whose funding constraints may not be as bad as a few of the other ones. Uh, we have another question. You have committed to give 50% of your wealth for philanthropic causes yourself. What are you allocating your commitment to? So this is a question on us. I think my own personal bias has been, so there are broadly two, three kinds of people that I've been fortunate to interact with during the course of living my promise. Since me and my partner, we come from the development sector ourselves, so we have a reasonable understanding and history of how the sector works, and therefore we have developed our point of views over a period of time, and that will continue to evolve as we grow. But at this point of time, my own personal stance on the commitment is to um, invest in the organization's mission and basically give what I can and leave the discretion of the usage of that money to the organization in the best possible manner that they see it fit. Uh, my idea is not to go and dictate or restrict the usage of my funding or my contribution to a specific activity, because the organization best understands what is the best use of the money, and we would like to make sure that the organization takes the decision, and we don't want to influence it in any way. For example, there are a couple of, call it, the sweet spots that I have. One is overheads of an organization is something that is critical, and typically organizations face challenges in raising that money from those funders who want their funds to go into a very restricted zone, right? So I have to feed somebody, or I have to educate a child, but there are also overhead expenses. So if my commitment is going to be used for that, we are more than happy to do that. The personal cost of organizations are sometimes that are not fully absorbed by their current funding partners. If my commitment is going towards funding somebody's salaries so that they are able to do much better work. As a classic case of example, for example, if my commitment is going into feeding into the salaries of a person who is in charge of fundraising in an organization, if I'm able to help that person, then that person will be able to raise significantly more resources from other agencies. So it's a sort of leveraged impact that we could have, and we're very open about it. So either unrestricted, which means I don't have any restrictions, or investing in talent or in the overheads, which is also unrestricted. Or a third aspect is those areas where typically does not get funded. So whether it is free media or certain or geographically speaking, in India, there's outstanding work done by a lot of people in the central and eastern belt of India, even in the northeast belt of India, but they do not receive the kind of funding that certain states receive. So if there are great nonprofits there, some of which that I'm familiar with, then we would like our money to be channelized in those directions where there is a need, but it is not backed up by enough funding. Uh, So thanks, Hussein, sort of for that question. Uh, we have another question from Venkat. Don't you think CSR will not look at new proposals because of how much funding they've already diverted to COVID relief, including PM CARES? Uh, so fair point, Venkat. I think, but if we look at least that data that I have been gathering through my conversations, yes, there has been a lot of funds that have been diverted to PM CARES, and that number keeps shooting up every passing day. That last I heard was about 7,000 crores, a little more than that. Um, but if you look at the percentage contribution from each corporate, it seems to me that it is about 20% of their annual budget that has been parked for parked for CSR or for the PM CARES fund. The proportion of how much has gone from corporates versus public sector units to PM CARES fund is something that is still not known. At least I do not know that. But my conversations with corporates has been that around 20% has been dedicated for PM CARES. So we still have the other money. In terms of new proposals, they may not actively look for new proposals, which is why I think it's super important to manage our existing relationships very well, because corporates definitely want to see how they can continue to support their existing nonprofits. So an active lookout for new proposals may be not there. However, having said that, even in their current commitments, let us say if I'm a corporate and I'm invested in 10 nonprofits, uh, there are examples of nonprofits who may not be able to uh, uh, absorb or utilize their resources in this year, and therefore there are nonprofits that have said that, hey, can we park it for next year, right? Now that funding which is not going to be utilized this year could potentially be lifted out and sort of dedicated to a COVID relief effort, which has already happened, right? And that is a one-on-one negotiation that happens between the corporates and the respective nonprofit partners. New partners, yes, it may not definitely be very high this year, but I think existing donors, existing commitments is something that has to be carefully handled to make the best use of that. Uh, I wouldn't make a sweeping generalization on new partners as well. The percentage may reduce, but there are still examples of corporates uh, who are who are willing to park some money. For example, I can definitely tell you that there are certain corporates who've already asked us as to what may be the sort of requirements for next year, right? So the involvement or the need to park money is something that has not died down, but that is something that every individual nonprofit will know based on their relationships with the existing corporates. Um, we have another question from Gopi Venkatraman. Do you think that international agencies might actually reduce their funding, given that they might need to look inward to help local organizations? Uh, Again, it's a very fair observation, Gopi. Yes, you're right. Um, if you look at, for example, in US or Europe, given all the things that are happening in the US as we speak, we don't know like whether there may be a mandate for the international donor agencies to divert a significant portion of their funds to organizations that are working in the US. Uh, but insofar as I understand it so far, um, there is a delay. There is not a active lookout for new organizations that they would like to fund. But again, there are several examples of foundations repurposing their commitments. So if they have given their funding to a certain program or a certain cause, they have been extremely flexible to repurpose that money and leave the decision to the organization to make the best use of that money that has already been committed, right? So they may not, like, again, I mean, like I said before, I think in the next 3 4 months is something that we should not anticipate for new funding to come from foundations. But post that, I still feel there are enough examples of foundations who are looking at geographical regions like in Asia and Southeast Asia in particular, where, because the India COVID story has increased more and more over the last few months. So the magnitude of it and the vulnerability of our own public health systems or education systems has only been coming into the limelight more and more. So there is an active interest in India as a geographical region for them to invest, but it may be delayed by more than 3 to 4 months. So the second half of this year is when I expect sort of foundations to revive their conversations. Uh, Ulhas has a question of how did you decide to donate 50%? What were the prompts? Actually, in my mind, it is 100%. So I don't have a cap at 50%. There was, like I said, I don't think it was, at least for me, it was not a very scientifically, rationally thought out cost benefit analysis. Karke, we will do this. It was just a very straightforward thing. I mean, one wonders that why was this not thought out before, right? Uh, of course, better late than never. But we have been contributing in our own individual capacities I mean, whenever, right? But it has not been a very systematic and planned way of giving. But I think once we take a pledge or a commitment, now there is a certain thinking between me and Mashkura to say that, hey, in a year, this is how much we earn, and this is the percentage that we would like to park for giving, and that money is untouched. So I think a certain rhythm or a discipline of parking money towards it in a very systematic way, that discipline has definitely crept up ever since the time that we took the pledge. Sort of before that, it was very, very sporadic. So that really has helped us, but I'm not very attached to 50%. I mean, like I said, after we are gone, I come from a very, very middle class upbringing. Uh, so during my lifetime, it is probably going to be in small contributions, but definitely post our lives, uh, we are happy to dedicate 100%. So it's not going to be capped at 50%. The prompts, I think one of the things might have helped is that I am from the sector itself. So I understand the difficulties, challenges, the need. So it was a very easy decision for me. But I do understand that I've had multiple conversations with a lot of my friends from college, my peers in other organizations, where I think uh, the understanding of this of the development sector in India, or the trust or the credibility that they need in order to place in an organization, is something that there is a certain learning curve or an education curve, and that needs time and investment more than money. I think it needs an investment of time and effort from people like us to sort of very carefully spend that time. It is not a one conversation, two conversation thing, but I think persistent follow-ups, persistent conversations are required to, sort of shift their thinking from either should I want to give and then actually make them give. So I think the first target audience, at least for me, the community that I approach, more than myself, I think we've already made the decision. But now my objective is to say, can I bring in more people? And the first people who I go and talk to is people who are on the fence, right? People who may have been thinking, people who have the intention to give. So how can we sort of bring them onto our side of the table? That's been my effort. Uh, the next question is: we've seen many corporate CEOs and CXOs cutting top management salary by 30 to 40%, and often to a nominal rupee one for this year, to ensure that junior staff is protected. We haven't seen many NGOs, especially the larger ones, make any such statement. Any thoughts on this? Uh, so, I mean, yes, I haven't seen a lot of public statements, but then it's not fair for me to comment whether somebody has done it or not. People may have done it, and we may not. It may not be in public domain. So I don't know about that, and I don't think it's fair for me to comment on that. But I think definitely I at least know of a few examples where the leadership has taken a significant slash from their own compensations in order to protect the interests of those who are there on the front lines. Uh, uh, Whether it is to make sure that there is a sustainable, recurring income for the frontline staff, whether it is to bring in certain, for example, things like health insurance or any social sort of protection that people need. I think organizations have taken some efforts. It may not be very visible in the public domain for reasons that are best known to them. Uh, so that's my take on that. But should we be doing it? And the non-profits, the answer is, I mean, definitely yes. I think these sort of things start from the leadership, and it goes top down. So examples have to be set depending on how the organization's respective financial positions are. We also have another question from Anurag. What about those non-profits whose work was dependent on on-ground initiatives? Raising funds for virtual classes, projects, and infrastructure cost is something that has become hardest. Uh, so Anurag, yes, I mean we've also been a sort of affected by it, where all our on-ground projects have come to a virtual standstill, and we had to rethink about how we want to shift from on-ground to online. But when you say raising funds, I'm not sure whether it is specific to raising new funds or repurposing the existing funds. I think, which is why I go back to the point on uh, if we are able to, I think donors have understood, and I can only speak for myself here. They have been extremely supportive and empathetic to saying that, hey, we understand the realities of the fact that one will not be able to continue with their on-ground models because of COVID. And even if they do, there is going to be a lot of restrictions around social distancing, and the viability of continuing the model offline is going to be jeopardized, right? It is going to be questioned. So if people have now, the alternative to that is when we say online, virtual, there will be question marks on how exactly is it going to be handled. And even if we do it, is it really going to have the kind of impact given the people who we want to serve? While technology is a very sort of cool thing to talk about, but it is also a function of access, right? So, are there existing infrastructures? Are there access? And if it is there, will the impact also happen in an online environment? I think a lot of the answers are very specific to those organizations, their respective models, and it will be very unfair for me to make a sweeping generalization. I do strongly believe that a grant that was given for an offline model, repurposing that to an online model, whether it is an education or training, is something that is doable, and the donors are sort of very, very understanding of that. If there is a reasonable thinking, thought out, thoughtful approach on how that is going to be carried out. Right. The second important thing also, I think, is to be realistic and also upfront announce the risks. Hey, while this is our hypothesis, this is how we see it happening, there are still a few unanswered questions, and here is where I have thought about the risks. And so, if you have scenarios being planned, ABC, and if that is being candidly and honestly shared with partners, I think there is enough empathy and support that is being extended from the other side as well. Uh, we have a question from Vasumati Sri Ganesh. This is a generic question about living my promise. The 50%, at what point in life is one promising it? Now, or at regular frequencies, or at end of one's life? Uh, yeah, so Basumati, I think it is completely left to the individual. Once you have taken a commitment to pledge 50%, uh, one of the ways in which to action is to actually, write a will. But whether the actual process of going about it, whether you want to do it in your lifetime, and at what installments do you want to do, what is the quantum of giving at what point in time, all these things are decisions that are left to you, whether you want to do it during your lifetime or at the end of one's life. So in my own personal case, the answer is that every year we have decided a certain number as a percentage of our collective compensation. When I say our, I mean me and my wife. We have decided to say that X percentage of it will go towards living my promise or the causes that we deeply care about. At even at the end of our life, 100% of it will go towards charity. So that is our thinking. I'm sure each one of the signatories have thought about it in their own way. So it's entirely up to you to sort of go about the way that you want to go about. Uh, Balakumar Rajaraman, should non-profits asks a question. Should nonprofits start concentrating more on their digital fundraising, individual fundraising efforts, especially the ones that are super dependent on CSR contributions alone so far? Yes, Bala, the answer is yes. Like I was saying earlier, we need to diversify our sources of funding. So, if organizations have been very dependent on CSR alone, it is important to develop those capabilities either within the organization. I mean, not at all points the capabilities or the DNA or the talent might reside within the organization. So, either the organization realigns itself to build those capabilities. It's very easy for me to say that, oh, let's start digital fundraising from tomorrow. But there are several questions to be answered, whether the people in the organization whether you have the sort of resident skill sets to execute digital fundraising. Do you have the infrastructure to do it? Do you have the necessary funding to even invest in digital fundraising? Because digital fundraising is very nascent in India. There is a long way to go for us there. So there is a certain cost that is involved in raising money online. So whether we even have the cost within is something that organization has to decide. Now, if the capabilities don't reside within the organization, there are also, for example, crowdfunding, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with. So how do we use capabilities that are outside of the organization, which will also come at a cost? But at least the drain on building talent, executional abilities is something that we don't have to bear the burden, but we look at other people for help. There are other organizations like, for example, Give India, which Venkat sort of founded. One could register sort of themselves with Give India and take their help in funding as well. Um, but yes, it is definitely important to diversify the funding. There is no question about it. Next question: what are the options for fundraising for nonprofits when the economy is under stress? Institutional donors versus high net worth individuals versus retail donors. Who is the best bet? Again, we've spoken about this. I think it's a very subjective answer based on what is your current pool of funders. Um, if the organizations, if the history of funders in your organization has been high net worth individuals, the fundamental starting point would be to go to those people and ask them to connect you with other prospective funders. Right? It is very important that we are able to uh, use our existing network to the best possible ability, maximize that out instead of going out for very random, scattered new sources of funding. How much we are able to leverage based on our existing network is super critical, whether it is CSR or whether it is individual fundraising or uh, any other sort of pool of funds. Non-profits need bright minds. What can we do to attract a highly skilled talent pool? Uh, so this is one of the questions that we at the Nudge definitely deeply value, and I'm personally also have seen a lot of value in having um, good talent within the organization and the wonders that they can make happen. Right? What can we do to attract them? So I think there are two things. I'll keep it short since we are almost approaching the end of the session. Is one, all of us know that the development sector will not be able to provide the same kind of financial trajectory that, let us say, a corporate career will be able to provide, right? And that is something anybody who comes into the ecosystem is should be made aware of, and they also should be conscious of it in their own individual self. That's a no brainer, right? It is unfortunate that there is a certain discrimination that exists between non-profits and for-profit organizations, but that is the reality, and let us not escape from it. Right? Now, in the absence of that, where people have to make a financial trade-off in their compensations, there are two more things that, at least personally, I have seen work very well. One is the working culture. I think when people make the transition, and here I'm sorry, I'm operating under the assumption, and that assumption is not completely true, that only it's I'm not trying to say that only for profits have bright minds. There are exceptional minds also in non-profits, but that is a population that is already there. They've already made the commitment to for a particular cause over their lifetime. But people who are on the fence, bright minds who are still not sure, I think for them an excellent working culture that is very similar to what they have encountered in the past, which is very fast paced, high energy, uh, sort of decision making speed, uh, decisions based on rational, logical choices, and also a peer group that they are able to relate to. So if you think you're a bright mind, you also want to be in the company of bright minds who are equally carrying the same passion, uh, dedication, and a certain logical approach to problem solving. So we also need to build a community. I think if you're able to provide this, talent does flow in. I'll keep it short at that because we have few more questions as well. And also, one more thing I want to add in talent is that we have to challenge the talent or the bright minds also with problems uh, that seem unsolvable. Because bright minds need a certain motivation. Please don't give me small challenges. Throw something at me that I feel that I think it is monumental, and that really drives people. And once we have that, I think the commitment levels are there to be seen everywhere. Uh, you have another question. I'm going to sort of see how we can. If the question is already answered, I'm not going to take it. So apologies for that. Uh, Somebody has asked whether I've taken this pledge at a relatively younger age, uh, and what can be the message for other people in my same age. So I'm 37 right now. I think uh, the message would be to just not think too much and just do it, right? Because I think the kind of questions that we do not ask in our lifestyle choices on a daily basis, and we are very comfortable making very quick decisions of spending, right? We don't sort of we are not very comfortable taking that quick decisions when it comes to helping others, right? And I'm not making a generalization. I'm sure there are so many exceptions, but at least there is a certain reluctance, there is a certain hesitation to take that first step forward. Uh, I think my sort of message or request or appeal would be that um, first not to come to a conclusion or not come to a decision on here is how the situation is, but actually make an effort to talk to people. And it is not always money that is the only expectation, right? There is a certain feeling that, oh, every time I'm only bombarded for money. There's also a lot of work done on people can contribute the time and skill sets in a very meaningful way. So maybe if they start involving themselves in a particular cause with their time and skill sets, then they develop a point of view, and then that point of view can extend into a monetary contribution also with some time. So spending time first using your skill sets might just be an entry point where you develop an understanding, or that could be the first point of request. The moment you go and ask for money, everybody has a certain hesitation. So maybe trying to involve them in your work, uh, whether it be whether it is by volunteering or by some other means, then gives them a picture of how things work, and then maybe they can be slowly nudged into also making a monetary contribution. uh, I think when I say inspiration, for me at least, what I say is that look, when I'm probably 60, 65, I think uh, all of us would want. I feel it is a very human thing to expect. We all want to reminisce very fond memories of what we have done over the last 30 years, and that is almost like what is the legacy that I'm leaving behind in this world, and have I done enough within my means to actually make that happen? And that is something that is a cornerstone of conversations, that when I have a drink with my friends or something, when all the midlife crisis sort of happens, we have this conversation, and I think it's a nice way to look at it. And I do want to recall fond memories, fond stories of meaningful work being done, and if we can contribute our money or time towards the direction, then I think it's a very easy decision to keep it that way without getting into a lot of details. Um, how can we get another question? How can we get corporate leaders, board members, etc., to step up their own giving? Uh, I think one is to in most cases, it requires the initial set of community to take that first step forward, right? I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm not a person who is very fond of intellectualizing things. But I think action is far more important, and the action can stem from an initial set of few people who can provide that much needed inspiration for others to follow suit. And it is certainly not going to be anybody like me, right? So if corporate leaders, one or two examples can be brought on board, and I'm sure they will be able to nudge other people forward to also taking this first step, towards giving. What does that require? I think it requires an enormous amount of persistence, it is not going to be something that is easily achievable, and I don't think we should even nurse such expectations. Oh, this is something that can happen immediately. I think it requires persistence, a lot of probably even shamelessness, uh, to keep at it, um, and also be smart about it. Not just persist, not just effort, but also smart effort. For example, smart effort means that are there fence sitters? For example, earlier I was making a comment on fence sitters. Can we nudge people who are already on that in that space of thinking about giving, and can we get them on board first? And then they will inspire or spiral the next generation of giving as well from other people. So that's the way I think. I think we are almost running short of time. It is 11:57. We have 3 more minutes to go. Uh, so I'm going to, in the interest of everybody who's given your time, thank you so much for joining this live session today with Living My Promise. So once again, I apologize for the technical glitch that happened at the beginning. Uh, Please do like the Living My Promise page on Facebook, and please do continue to watch out for other live sessions that happen every Saturday. We do have sort of repeated live sessions that are happening from all the signatories with each week having their own point of views. I'm sure it's been a great learning journey for me, and I hope it will be a great journey, sort of learning journey for all of you. So please do continue to follow us, like us, comment us, and come back with any feedback that you may have on how we can make this happen in a better fashion. Uh, so thank you so much for all your time. Uh, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry, we have one more question since we have a minute more. I'm going to take this. A question from Prashant Anand. Do we see an increase in the government regulations and monitoring of relief work, uh, especially in marginal areas, forest communities, type areas? Okay. So I think on the regulatory side, I think recently, if for people who may not be aware of it, recently it was quite inspiring to see the Supreme Court actually, I mean, sort of judge in favor of a petition that was around the FCRA regulations and ability for organizations to absorb FCRA money, right? So while government regulations, there has been a certain back and forth on the conditions and environment that surround funding in particular. But I mean, while we have to, again, there are so many uncertainties out there that it is very difficult for me to have a firm point of view there. But regulations around, let's say, CSR and an expectation on corporates to report back on their expenses on COVID is something that has already been actioned. So corporates do have a mandate to report back on how they have spent their CSR money on COVID. So there is a certain expectation. I don't know whether it's a regulation, but it is an expectation that they have to go back with. So that is one thing. Whether the money uh, uh, on other tribal areas, remote geographies, etc., how will this influence funders? I think a regulation is a regulation, I mean, independent of the areas where we serve. I don't know if there is any a distinction regulation between urban sort of fundings and in most difficult areas. If it is a regulation, it is going to affect more or less everybody, unless and until there is a specific question you had, Mr. Prashant. But I understand regulations as anything that concerns FCRA or anything on anything that governs, CSR funding in the context of funding, or anything on implications on tax or financial structures that the organization has to be ready for. So the pain on or the pain on sort of reporting back, the governance structures, the regulations on reporting back may increase or may be there, maybe a little bit more painful. But I think that's at least so insofar as I know, as of to date, I haven't seen anything dramatic that has happened that is going to cause a lot of heartburn. Okay. So with that, we are already 1 minute past 12. So we'll end it for today. Thank you so much again for everybody who joined us, and thank you, Venkat, and thank you, Sushant, for giving this opportunity. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend, all of you. Thank you.